everyone, Mr. G again. This is part 2 to our week 1 lesson all about equations with fractions, decimals, and parentheses. If you haven't seen part 1, please look at that. This equation right here, obviously now we're dealing with decimals, lots of decimals in this equation, and it looks kind of scary. However, we solve this question just like we would the previous question with fractions, and the way that we can do that is think about getting rid of the decimal places. So just like before, when we have a nasty equation like this, we want to make it look nice, so we want to get rid of our decimals. How do we do that? Let's recall something. If I have a decimal like this last one here, I can get rid of these decimals by multiplying by a number, 100. The reason why we need 100 is we want to move this decimal place 2 times, and so we need a 1 with 2 zeros. That will get rid of this. And that's true for any decimal. So all we need to do is figure out how many decimal places each one needs to move, and we're going to pick the biggest one. Here we have 1 decimal place. Here we have 2 decimal places. Here we have 3, and this one has 2. So we're not going to be multiplying by 1 here, 2 here, 3 here, and 2 here. Remember, we have to do the same thing to both sides. Everything in the equation is going to get multiplied by the same number. So we need to pick the smallest number that's going to fix all of these. This one has the most decimal places that need to move. It has 3 decimal places. So we are going to multiply by 1 with 3 zeros next to it. We've written it out so that we're multiplying both sides by 1,000 in this case to get rid of all of these decimals. Just like before, we want to make sure we're distributing everything in. We're multiplying by 1,000 to each part of this. And when we multiply by 1,000, really what we're doing is we're moving the decimal place 3 times. So for example, 0.3, if we move the decimal place 3 times, we take our decimal, we go 1, 2, 3. That's going to be our new decimal place. Any empty spots that we have here, these become zeros. So our first part is going to be 300x. We can do a similar thing for 0.07, still moving it 3 decimal places. So our next part is going to be minus 70. And I'll do that for the rest of these. Once we're back to this spot, we know exactly how to solve. Move all the numbers to one side, move all of the x's to one side. And that should be what you get. I just noticed that I made a little mistake copying this down. That should be negative 0.005, so it should be a negative there. Fixed it, so now we get this part. Last step, we've got 260x. Opposite of multiplying by 260 is dividing by 260. And when you reduce this fraction, you should get 1 over 4. So that's our first example, going over how to get rid of decimals. Here's our last example. If you notice here, we've got some parentheses, we've got some brackets here. We've also got a big fraction on this side. So both of these are being divided by 6. The reason I chose this example is because it shows how we can get rid of both of these, and we actually get rid of them in the same way. We get rid of them by distributing. Think back to polynomials. So we've already talked a little bit about distributing with brackets when we were multiplying both sides of an equation. The 3 over 4 is going to get multiplied by both of these. When we talk about distributing with fractions, we're distributing the division. This part being divided, this part being divided as well. Both parts are getting divided by 6, and once you do that, this is what you should get. Now, anytime we're distributing multiplication or division, it's a good idea to try and clean these up and simplify as much as possible. Once you do that, you should end up with something that looks like this. Now, this isn't going to be easy to solve, but we know how to solve these types of problems. Any problem where we have fractions, we want to look for the least common denominator that we can multiply by to get rid of everything. In this case, our least common denominator is going to be 12. If we multiply everything in our equation by 12, we're going to get rid of all of the fractions. So you wouldn't have to show this work even if we were in class and doing these types of problems, but I want to show it in a lot of detail so you can see how we're getting each part. Again, we can multiply top and bottom or use cross-reducing in this case. I like cross-reducing because it's going to keep the numbers small. For our first one, we'll end up with 3 and 1. Second one will also be 3 and 1. Once we have all of this, we can clean it up and get a nice no fractions equation, which should look something like this. Now notice we've got 4 times negative x. It's not 4 minus x up here, so be careful with that. They're not being subtracted here, even though it kind of looks like it. Once we have this, again, we move all the x's to one side, all the numbers to the other, and we solve it. So adding 4x and 45 to both sides, we end up with 13x equals 39. Just like before, we want to divide by 13 to get rid of the 13 being multiplied by x. Opposite of multiplying by 13 is dividing by 13, and we get our answer of x equals 3. Just like before, you can check this. If it's a nice number like 3, it shouldn't be too bad to check, even if there are brackets and fractions. So I encourage you to try that for yourself. That's the end of the video here. The homework 6.1 and 6.2, you should be able to do all of it at this point. I won't write it down here. I'll put it in the description for the video. Remember, you have an assignment to complete by Sunday, so please make sure that you complete that assignment. It will be questions like this. See you later.